that was already hers. The last thing Marina remembered was rain. It was rain against the windshield, relentless and drumming, a rhythmic assault on the glass. Rain blurring headlights into long jagged streaks of white and gold that bled across the asphalt like dying stars. It was rain swallowing the road until it felt as though she were driving through liquid glass, the entire world reduced to the hypnotic, rhythmic slap of wiper blades, and the dry warmth of her car's heater fighting a losing battle against the March chill. And a voice in her ears. It was deep, masculine. It was rough with a sense of restrained heat. The kind of voice that truly shouldn't be allowed to narrate anything less than private recordings made for specific, illicit purposes. The audiobook narrator was describing him with such careful, almost loving detail, that Marina had found herself gripping the steering wheel much tighter than necessary. Nox Goran, leader of the tribe, 80 years sworn to protect a kingdom that despised his very people. He was tall, dark-haired. He was lithe and brutal and beautiful, in the exact way that wild things were beautiful, dangerous even in his stillness. She remembered smiling then at the sheer absurdity of how detailed the author had been regarding his body. There were full paragraphs devoted to the way his tunic stretched across his shoulders, how the female lead, Danielle, had noticed the controlled violence in the way he moved, how he had been described as a man forged in battle and fire, with eyes like molten gold and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile until Danielle came along. Marina had rolled her eyes at that particular line. Forged in battle and fire. Who actually wrote this stuff? But she was enjoying every single word of it. After 12 grueling hours in the ER, after watching a 6-year-old struggle not to cry while they stitched up his small palm, after holding the hand of an elderly woman who kept asking for a husband long dead, after the smell of antiseptic and the fluorescent buzz that never quite left her skull, she deserved something brainless. She deserved something that didn't require critical thought, something that promised a happy ending she didn't have to work for. And then the truck ran the red light. She saw it coming from the corner of her eye. A massive grill, the kind that belonged on something that hauled heavy timber or cattle, barreling through the intersection like the laws of physics, were merely suggestions. She had been tired from her shift. It was her fault, really. She should have been paying attention instead of mentally composing a scathing review about overwrought descriptions of fictional barbarians. Metal screamed. The world flipped. Her life flashed before her eyes, not in the poetic way people usually described, not a highlight reel of meaningful moments, but in jagged fragments. Her mother's face, the scar on her knee from falling off her bike at age 8, the way the morning light looked through her apartment windows. The audiobook was still playing in her ears, the narrator's voice cutting out mid-sentence, fear, sharp and electric. Then came a peaceful acceptance of the end, surprisingly calm, like falling asleep after being awake for far too long. The pain lasted for only a second before everything went silent. Then warmth. The very first thing she felt was warmth. Not hospital-white warmth, not that dry, sterile heat of heated blankets and monitored rooms, not fluorescent ceiling warmth. Skin. Bare skin. It was heat radiating against her cheek like a furnace, like lying in sun-warmed sand, like pressing close to someone on a bitter cold night. And something solid beneath her hand. Her palm was resting on muscle. Hard. Smooth. Living. The kind of muscle that came from actual labor. Not gym machines and protein shakes. The kind that shifted and breathed and existed in a way that made her fingers want to explore further. She inhaled. The air smelled of leather. Smoke. Something woodsy and male that made her stomach tighten in ways that had nothing to do with survival instincts. Not antiseptic. Not blood. But man. Her fingers flexed instinctively, tracing the contour of what felt like a truly spectacular abdominal wall. The muscle beneath them tightened. And then, a voice. Low. Sleep rough. Amused in a way that suggested the owner found something genuinely entertaining about the current situation. Marina. The sound of it vibrated through the chest beneath her cheek, resonated in a way that suggested she was very thoroughly draped across the speaker. Her name. But not just her name, the way he said it. Like it was familiar on his tongue, like he'd said it before, many times, in many contexts, including some that made her face heat just from the implication. Then she felt it. A hand. Large. Warm. Calloused. On her ass. Squeezing. Pulling her closer. Her eyes snapped open at the realization that this was real. That the naked man beneath her was very, very real. That she was naked too. That her body was responding to his touch with a familiarity that made her want to scream. The ceiling above her wasn't white. It wasn't her apartment ceiling with its water stain that looked vaguely like the state of Florida. It wasn't hospital tile with fluorescent panels. It was timbered. Rough-hewn beams crossed overhead, shadows cutting through early morning light that slanted through gaps in the walls. Actual gaps, through which she could see actual trees. And snow. She was lying on something soft but uneven, furs. Actual animal pelts that smelled faintly of wood smoke and something wild. Her cheek pressed to a chest. A bare chest. Her body was half draped over someone, one leg hooked possessively over his thighs, her arm wrapped around his waist like she'd been holding on in her sleep. Heavy. Possessive. Warm. Her breath hitched. She pushed up on her hands, palms pressing into that ridiculously defined chest, and looked down. Bronzed skin. Broad shoulders that could have been carved from marble, if marble had warmth and life. And the subtle shift of muscle beneath. Dark hair spilling across a pillow of black fur, tousled in a way that suggested recent activity. Sharp jaw dusted with stubble that gleamed faintly in the morning light. Eyes opening slowly, lazily, like a predator who already knew exactly where his prey lay and had all the time in the world to decide what to do about it. Golden eyes. Not hazel. Not brown with light catching them. Actual, literal, impossible gold. Like molten metal. Like something that shouldn't exist outside of fantasy novels and contact lens advertisements. Familiar eyes. Too familiar. But not through her own lens, through someone else's. Through descriptions she'd listened to for hours. Through paragraphs of purple prose that she'd mentally mocked even while secretly enjoying every word. Her stomach dropped through the floor. Goran was staring at her. Completely naked. Completely unashamed. With the expression of a man who had woken up next to this particular woman many times before and found nothing unusual about the situation. She jerked backward so violently she tangled herself in the furs and fell clean off the bed. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Her back hit what felt like packed earth covered with more furs, and she lay there for a moment, staring up at the timbered ceiling, trying to remember how to breathe. Knox pushed himself up on one elbow, watching her from above with something between irritation and lazy amusement. The movement made the furs slide, revealing more of that bronzed skin, more of those scars, more of everything she really didn't need to see right now. "You weren't this clumsy last night." His voice. It was the same voice from the audiobook. The exact same timbre. The same rough edges, the same way of wrapping around words like they mattered more than they should. Only now it vibrated in the air. Real, physical, close enough that she could feel it in her chest. But it can't be. Was her mother right? She did say the smutty books Marina usually listened to would fry her normal brain cells. Said it would rot her brain and give her unrealistic expectations. Said that no good would come of spending so much time with fictional men who didn't exist. Her mother had not anticipated this particular consequence. Her heart began pounding so violently she thought she might black out again. This is a dream. This is a concussion hallucination. This is brain trauma. She'd hit her head in the crash. She was in a hospital somewhere, unconscious, dreaming vividly while machines beeped and doctors tried to figure out why she wasn't waking up. That had to be it. She scrambled backward across the floor, her back hitting something solid, a carved wooden chest with iron fittings. The impact jarred her teeth. Her gaze dropped to herself. She was naked. Completely. And her skin was not her skin. Marina had always been comfortable with her body. It wasn't spectacular, but it was functional. She was 5'5", a little soft around the edges from too many 12-hour shifts and not enough gym time, with knees that popped when she stood up and feet that ached after long days. This body was different. Softer at the hips in a way that curved rather than padded. Longer in the legs, leaner in the calves. Her breasts were fuller in a way she'd always wished for. Heavy in a way that made her cheeks burn just from looking at them. They were the kind of breasts that required support garments she didn't currently have. Blonde hair spilled over her shoulders when she grabbed at it, pulling it forward to stare. Blonde. Silky. Wavy. The kind of blonde that looked natural and expensive and like it had never seen a box dye in its life. Her hair wasn't blonde. It was straight brunette that couldn't hold a curl to save its life. The kind of brown that people called mousy when they were being unkind, and chocolate when they were being generous. Not this. None of this was hers. Her breath came shallow, fast, too quick to actually get oxygen into her lungs. Knox swung his legs over the side of the bed and stood, unapologetically, unashamedly, completely bare. Marina's brain short-circuited. He was exactly as described in the book. Tall, easily over 6 feet, towering even from across the room. Lean but powerfully built. The kind of body that came from practical physical demands rather than aesthetic goals. Muscle carved by training, not vanity. Functional, efficient, beautiful in the way that weapons were beautiful. Scars mapping his torso like a story written in blade strokes. Some old and silvered, some newer and still pink. A long one curved around his ribs. A smaller one bisected his left eyebrow. A circular scar on his shoulder that looked like an old arrow wound. And he was, she swallowed, well endowed, was a ridiculous understatement. That was a third leg. That was the kind of anatomical detail that made her understand why romance novels sometimes included warnings. That was, she had, last night. She clenched her legs and could feel the evidence of him from the previous night. a tenderness, a soreness that spoke to activities she had no memory of participating in, but that her body clearly remembered. She let out a strangled, hysterical sound that was half laugh, half choke. He raised a brow. "Have you struck your head?" His gaze moved over her in slow assessment. Clinical almost, but not quite. There was something else beneath the surface, something that looked like concern, buried under layers of accustomed familiarity. Possessive. Familiar. Not reverent. Not worshipful. Used to her. Of course he was used to her. Because this wasn't her. This was someone else's body. Someone else's life. Someone else's relationship with a fictional warlord who shouldn't exist. "Marina," he said again, slower now, testing the name like he was checking for a reaction. The name struck differently. It echoed in her skull, bounced off memories that weren't hers, settled into place with an awful, inevitable click. Marina. She froze. That was her name. But it wasn't. It couldn't be this body's name. Except it was. Her stomach twisted violently. The book. The novel. The Warriors of Arinthia. The side character. The blonde lover who was mentioned in mere paragraphs. Plot fodder for the main character's background and development. The one who existed solely to die, to provide motivation, to teach the hero how to love, so he could properly appreciate the real heroine when she arrived. The one who died. Marina Vale. Her name. Her full name, the one her mother had given her, because it sounded classic and timeless. Marina Vale, born in a small town in Ohio, raised on macaroni and cheese and public television, grown into a nurse who worked too hard and read too many romance novels. Marina Vale, who now apparently shared a name and a body with a fictional character destined for an early grave. The world tilted. She pressed a hand to her mouth. "No," she whispered. The word came out muffled, barely audible. Knox's expression shifted slightly. Not concerned. Not yet, but wary. His posture changed, subtle adjustments that spoke of someone who had spent his life reading threats in small movements. He stepped toward her. She flinched violently. Actually flinched. A full body, instinctive recoil, pressing back against the chest like she could melt through it and escape. The movement was instinctive, not calculated, not seductive, not playful. Real fear. He stopped, and something hardened in his eyes. Not anger, something colder. Something that looked like the first flicker of understanding that something was very wrong. "Last night," he said, his voice cooling, "you were singing a different tune." Her face flamed. Memories flickered at the edges of her consciousness. Not hers, but somehow in her, like echoes of someone else's experience. Heat, hands, his mouth at her throat. His mouth was everywhere, to be honest, trailing fire across skin that remembered even if her mind didn't. Her, this body, arching beneath him, screaming with no shame, no restraint, completely lost in sensation. The furs tangled around their legs, his voice low against her ear, saying things that made her current face burn even thinking about them. She squeezed her eyes shut. No. She had not. She had not slept with a fictional warlord. The book Marina had. The character Marina Vale had. But she wasn't. She was just Marina from Ohio, who worked at a hospital and lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and had a cat named Calcifer, who was probably starving right now because she was. She had died. She remembered dying. The truck. The impact. The brief flash of pain, and then nothing. She had died. But her memories were all vivid and clear, like it was her who had actually lived them. Her childhood. Her mother's face. The first time she'd seen snow. The day she'd graduated nursing school. All of it. Intact and real. And layered over it, like tissue paper over a photograph, were other memories. A different childhood. A different mother. A life in a world that shouldn't exist. She had been driving home from a 12-hour ER shift. She had been listening to this book because she needed something brainless to drown out the smell of blood and antiseptic. She had died. And now, she opened her eyes. He was still there, still watching her, still naked. This wasn't brain damage. This was impossible. A noise erupted outside the house, shouts, harsh and urgent, carrying through the morning air. Movement. Feet running, something heavy being dragged. The clang of metal against metal, like swords being sharpened, or shields being stacked. Knox's attention shifted instantly. His body moved before thought, predatory, alert, every line of him going tight with readiness. The lazy amusement vanished completely, replaced by something sharp and focused. He grabbed trousers from a nearby chair and pulled them on in a fluid motion, the fabric settling over those long legs, that absurdly perfect backside. Marina couldn't stop staring. She knew she should look away. She knew she was being ridiculous, but her eyes refused to cooperate with common sense. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He seemed like the kind of man who noticed everything. A corner of his mouth tilted. Just slightly. Just enough to suggest that despite the situation, despite whatever was happening outside, he found something genuinely amusing about her staring. "There she is," he murmured. She blinked. "What?" "I know that look." He stepped closer again, slowly. "Testing." She held her ground this time, though every nerve screamed at her to run, to hide, to find somewhere safe to process the impossibility of her situation. He crouched in front of her, so they were eye level. His gaze searched her face with unsettling intensity, moving over her features like he was reading something written there, like he could see the confusion and fear and desperate denial playing out behind her eyes. "You look at me as though you've never seen me before," he said quietly, not accusatory. Observant. She swallowed. "I haven't." Silence. His jaw tightened slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but she was watching him too closely now, cataloging every micro-expression the way she'd learned to do with patients who couldn't communicate their pain. He reached out, brushed his knuckles against her cheek. Her skin reacted before her mind could stop it. Heat flared low in her stomach, treacherous and undeniable. Her lips parted slightly. Her body leaned toward his touch like a flower toward sunlight. This body knew him. Even if she didn't, even if her mind was screaming that this was wrong, impossible, a hallucination, a dream, her body remembered. Her body trusted. Her body wanted. Her breath hitched. His eyes darkened. The gold seemed to deepen, to heat, to focus on her with an intensity that made her feel like the only person in the world. "Do not play games with me this morning, Marina." The way he said her name. Ownership. History. Intimacy. It made something inside her crack. The walls she'd been trying to build. The denial she'd been clinging to. The desperate hope that she would wake up in a hospital bed any moment now. All of it crumbled. "I'm not playing," she whispered. Her voice broke on the last word. His thumb moved to her lower lip, pressed, gently, but not softly. There was intent behind the touch, a weight that suggested he was used to her responding to him, used to her lips parting for him, used to her surrendering to whatever he wanted. "You were not shy when I—" "Stop." The word tore out of her, raw and desperate. She didn't need him to narrate their escapades last night when they were in clear HD in her mind. Didn't need the reminder that this body had done things with this man that she'd only ever read about. Didn't need to know that she'd apparently enjoyed every second of it. His brows snapped together. Before he could respond, the door to the longhouse opened. Cold morning air rushed in, bringing with it the smell of snow and wood smoke and something metallic that might have been blood. It hit her bare skin, and she shivered violently, suddenly aware that she was still naked, still huddled on the floor, still very much not in control of this situation. A warrior stood at the threshold. He was younger than Nox, maybe early 20s, with the same bronze skin and dark hair but none of the scars. His eyes went briefly to Marina, a flicker of something that might have been surprise or concern, before snapping to his chief. "Chief," he said. "They have arrived." Nox straightened immediately. The warmth in his expression cooled, the intimacy of the past few moments sliding away like water off stone. "All of them?" "Yes." "At the eastern gate. The king's men brought them under guard, but—" the young warrior hesitated. "There is a woman with them. She claims blood right." Something shifted in Nox's expression. Interest, perhaps. Or wariness. It was hard to tell with so little to read. Nox nodded once. "Bring them to the square." The warrior left, pulling the door closed behind him. The door closed. Silence returned. Except now the air felt different. Charged. Icy. Nox turned back to her. "We leave by midday," he said. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Leave. Today. The vow. 80 years of protection sworn by his great-grandfather to the king of Arinthia. 80 years of the Goran people serving as the kingdom's shield, fighting wars not their own, dying for a land that called them barbarians even as they bled for it. 80 years of being used and despised in equal measure. And now, it was over. The current king had broken the treaty, had refused to honor the terms, had declared the Goran no longer welcome in Arinthian lands. They were leaving. And in the novel, she felt the blood drain from her face. In the novel, once the Goran left Arinthia, the kingdom fell within months. Invaded by the northern tribes who had been held at bay for 8 decades, by Goran steel and Goran blood, massacred because there was no one left to fight. The king executed in his own throne room, the city burned to ash and bone. And Marina Vale, blonde, pretty, foolish Marina, who existed only to show how much Nox had loved and lost before meeting the real heroine, died trying to flee with her family. Her family. Her chest constricted so tightly she couldn't breathe. Her parents. Her little brother. They were alive right now, in this world. They had names and faces and histories that Marina could suddenly remember if she reached for them. Not her memories, but the characters' memories, pressing against the inside of her skull like they wanted to be seen. They were alive, and they were going to die. Because history demanded it. Because the plot required it. Because Marina Vale was never meant to survive long enough to matter. Knox watched her carefully. His golden eyes missed nothing. The way her breath had caught, the way her hands had clenched in the furs, the way her face had gone pale as milk. "You look as though you have seen a ghost," he said quietly. She let out a hollow laugh. The sound echoed off the timbered walls, wrong and broken. Something like that. He studied her for another long moment. She could see him weighing options, considering possibilities, trying to fit her behavior into his understanding of who she was supposed to be. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The door closed behind him. She stayed on the floor long after he left, her body trembling, her mind racing. This wasn't just transmigration. This wasn't just waking up in a book. This wasn't some fantasy where she got to be the heroine and have adventures and fall in love with the dark-haired warrior. This was a ticking clock. This was a death sentence, with her name on it. She pushed herself to her feet. Her legs felt strange, slightly shorter than she was used to, with different balance points and muscle memory. She stumbled twice before she made it to the bed, catching herself on the carved post. She found a dress hanging near the bed. Soft cream fabric, fitted at the waist. Marina Vale's dress. She pulled it on. The fabric hugged curves she wasn't used to navigating. Fuller hips, a narrower waist, breasts that required more support than the thin material provided. The neckline was lower than she would have chosen, the sleeves shorter, the whole garment designed for a world without central heating. She braided the blonde hair quickly with shaking fingers, working it into a plait that hung over one shoulder. The motions felt foreign, her hands not quite knowing how to handle hair that was longer and thicker than she was used to. Then, she stepped outside. The Goran encampment stretched before her. Dozens of sturdy wooden longhouses arranged in rough rows, their roofs steeply pitched against snow. Mountains rose in the distance, jagged and white-capped, so close she could see the shadows of crevasses on their faces. The air was cold and thin and smelled of pine and smoke and animals. And movement everywhere. Warriors moving with efficiency, strapping packs to horses, checking weapons, speaking in low voices. Children helping roll furs and bundle cooking implements. Women carrying supplies, directing the chaos with calm authority. Everyone was preparing to leave. And at the center of the square formed by the largest longhouses, 3 figures stood. 2 younger girls, dark-haired and tense, their faces pale beneath sun-kissed skin. They stood close together, shoulders touching, like they drew courage from each other. And between them, Danielle. She was exactly as described, red hair falling in thick waves down her back, catching the morning light like spun copper. Sun-kissed skin with a dusting of freckles across her nose. A thin scar slicing through one brow, giving her face a permanent look of slight challenge. A sword strapped across her back like it belonged there, like she'd been born with it. She stood tall, unbowed, unapologetic, beautiful with striking gray eyes that seemed to see everything and judge most of it lacking. Even surrounded by Goran warriors, twice her size. Even with Knox approaching her now, his warriors parting to let him through. Even with the weight of every gaze in the encampment fixed on her. Marina felt something twist in her chest. This was supposed to happen later. Danielle wasn't meant to appear until after the invasion, until after the kingdom fell, until after Marina Vale died, screaming and alone, while Knox was too far away to save her. But she was here, now. Danielle's voice carried across the square, clear and strong, with no tremor of fear, no hesitation. "I am Danielle Goran," she said. "Daughter of Cale Goran." A murmur rippled through the tribe. Cale, a famous fallen warrior, Knox's cousin, if Marina remembered correctly. Killed in the last major battle before the treaty broke, defending Arinthian soldiers who had fled and left him to die. Knox's gaze sharpened. "You are Arinthian," he said evenly. "Not an accusation. An observation." "I am both," Danielle replied. "My father died serving your people. I will not remain in a kingdom that spits on his name." Her spine was straight as a blade, her chin lifted slightly, meeting Knox's stare without flinching. "I returned to my father's blood." Silence stretched. The entire encampment seemed to hold its breath. Knox stepped closer. Close enough to touch. Close enough that Danielle would have to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "You can wield that sword?" he asked. Danielle didn't hesitate. She drew it. The blade sang as it left the sheath, catching the light, gleaming with an edge that looked sharp enough to split hair. She held it with ease, not the stiff grip of someone who'd learned from books, but the natural hold of someone who'd grown up with steel in her hand. Confidence, not arrogance. "I can." Knox circled her once. Slowly. Deliberately. Assessing every line of her body, every subtle shift of weight, every breath. Danielle's eyes followed him. There was something in them, attraction perhaps, or recognition. The same kind of spark that Marina had read about in the novel, the instant pull between 2 people who were meant to find each other. Marina watched this unfold with a surreal detachment. This was the heroine. The fire. The fury. The woman who would stand beside Nox as queen in the original story. Who would fight at his side, challenge him, change him. Who would give him everything Marina Vale never could. Red hair and fury, strength and pride. And Marina, soft, blonde, supposedly dizzy, disposable, the perfect Canon fodder. She felt something strange settle inside her. Not jealousy, not yet, recognition. The story had already begun shifting. Danielle was here too early, in the wrong place, under circumstances that didn't match the novel. Something had changed, and Marina was standing in the wrong place, wearing the wrong body, living on borrowed time. Nox completed his circle, stopping in front of Danielle. He nodded once. You and your sisters may travel under trial. Danielle inclined her head, not submissive, acknowledging, accepting the terms without surrendering an inch of her dignity. Nox turned, and his gaze landed on Marina. For a moment, just a moment, something unreadable passed through his expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition that something about her was different this morning. Then it was gone. He walked past her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. Heat flared where they touched, electric and immediate. Her body reacted before her mind could stop it, pupils dilating, breath catching, pulse quickening. He leaned slightly toward her as he passed. If you intend to act mad, he murmured quietly, do not do so before my warriors. His voice was low enough that only she could hear, private, intimate, a reminder that they shared something the rest of the camp didn't know about. Then he was gone, striding toward the longhouse they'd just left, calling orders to his warriors as he went. Her breath caught. She stood in the square, watching as Danielle sheathed her sword with a fluid motion that spoke of years of practice. The red-haired woman glanced toward her. Their eyes met. Danielle's gaze flicked over her. Blonde hair, soft dress, bare feet in the cold snow. The assessment was quick and thorough, the kind of look that gathered information in seconds. Assessment, dismissal, not cruel, just factual. It was obvious that Marina didn't belong in this camp, that she was soft where these people were hard, that she was here for one purpose only, warmth and comfort, and the kind of easy pleasure that warriors sought before battle. In the original novel, Danielle had disliked women like Marina, not out of jealousy, but out of genuine incomprehension. Women who clung to men for protection. Women who were soft, always needing rescue. Women who existed only in relation to the men they belonged to. Marina felt the weight of it, the dismissal, the categorization, the assumption that she didn't matter. But this wasn't the original novel anymore. Marina lifted her chin slightly. Just enough to be noticeable. Just enough to suggest that she wasn't what she appeared to be. Danielle's gaze sharpened, just slightly, as if she sensed something different, something that didn't fit the expected pattern. Good, Marina thought. Let her sense it. Let her wonder. Because this time, this Marina would not die screaming in a burning city. This Marina would not exist solely to teach a man how to please another woman. This Marina would not fade into the background, forgotten as soon as the real story began. This Marina would survive, even if she had to rewrite the entire story to do it. Even if she had to become something no one expected. Even if it meant standing against fate itself. And somewhere, deep inside her chest, beneath the fear, beneath the shock, beneath the lingering heat of the night she hadn't lived, the memories that weren't hers, the body that felt both wrong and right, something steady began to form. Not fire, not fury, not the burning rage of a warrior or the sharp edge of a heroine's determination. Water, slow, persistent, shaping stone without ever raising its voice. The vow was ending. The kingdom would fall. The heroine had arrived. And Marina, the side character, the one never meant to survive, had just stepped into the story with her eyes wide open. And this time, she was not singing the same tune. Chapter 2, 80 Years of Blood. Marina did not hesitate this time. She followed Nox straight into the longhouse before she could second-guess herself, before the fear could coil around her ankles and root her to the frozen ground. The door closed behind her with a solid thunk, cutting off the cold and the noise and the chaos of a tribe preparing to abandon everything. Inside, the air was thick with movement. Furs were being rolled tight and bound with leather straps, stacked in neat piles near the door. Weapon racks stood half empty, their contents distributed to warriors, or packed in oiled cloth. Chests lay open, their contents sorted into neat, deliberate piles. Here for carrying, here for leaving, here for burning. Nothing about the Goran was chaotic. Even their departure carried the discipline of people who had learned that survival depended on order. Nox stood at the center of it all. He was issuing orders without raising his voice, the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of being obeyed without question. Warriors moved at his direction like extensions of his will, anticipating needs before they were spoken. Take only what can be carried without slowing the horses. Leave the broken shields. They can be replaced. Prioritize grain over ale. Ale won't keep children alive through winter. Marina stepped forward. Nox. He didn't turn. His attention was fixed on a warrior reporting something about a damaged wagon wheel. The words too low for her to catch. Not now. It cannot wait. That made him pause. Slowly, deliberately, he pivoted to face her. The warrior he'd been speaking to melted away, recognizing that something had shifted in the room's temperature. His expression was not tender. It was not the lazy amusement of the morning, not the possessive heat of their earlier conversation. It was focused, sharp, the face of a man running calculations behind his eyes. A mental list of priorities, and she was interrupting it. Behind him, two warriors lifted a heavy chest and carried it past. The scent of iron and oiled leather clung to the air, mixing with wood smoke and the faint animal smell of the furs. "You have something to say?" His voice was clipped. "We are burning daylight." She ignored the edge in his tone. Let it slide off her like water. "You're leaving Arinthia without protection." A muscle jumped in his jaw, the only sign that her words had landed at all. "Yes, you know what will happen." "What will happen," he said evenly, "is no longer my concern." Her hands curled at her sides, the nails bit into her palms, grounding her. "The borders are already strained. The northern lords are restless. Trade caravans have been ambushed twice this season alone. Merchants are talking about it in the markets. Soldiers too." His eyes sharpened. The gold in them caught the firelight, flickering like something alive. "You speak as though you sit in council chambers." "I listen." She held his gaze. "I'm not as stupid as you think." The words came out harder than she intended. But in truth, the original Marina had been, not stupid exactly, but willfully ignorant. Her attraction to Nox had always been layered with something uncomfortable, a willingness to overlook the prejudice of her people, because his bed was warm and his hands were skilled. This Marina was not that woman. "I hear things," she continued. "Markets are thinning. Grain shipments delayed. The capital is unstable. The king hasn't been seen in public for 3 weeks. Rumors say he's ill. Others say he's been poisoned. Either way, there's no leadership. And that," he said, stepping closer, "is the king's failure, not mine, not my people's. It will not just be the king who suffers." His gaze hardened. The warmth that had been there earlier, the possessive heat, the flickers of something almost tender, gone now, replaced by something older. "Colder. For 80 years, he said quietly, we have guarded their borders. For 80 years my people have bled so their merchants could travel safely and their nobles could sleep without fear." He took another step toward her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell leather and steel, and the faint sharpness of sweat. "For 80 years we endured being called savages, barbarians, dogs." The last word was almost spat. It landed between them like something broken. Marina held her ground. "We stayed," he continued, his voice tightening with each word, "because my great-grandfather swore loyalty when the Arinthian king saved his wife from a fever that should have killed her. A life for a life, protection for protection. That was the vow." She had heard that story in the novel. It had been romanticized there, softened into something almost beautiful. The origin of an alliance, the beginning of a legend. It sounded different in his mouth, not romantic, not noble, heavy, like a chain he'd been carrying his entire life. "The vow is fulfilled," he said. 80 years, not 79, not 81. 80 exactly, to the day we leave. His eyes locked onto hers, demanding she understand. "We gave them 80 years of blood. We owe them nothing more." The longhouse felt suddenly smaller. The walls pressed in, the fire crackled too loud, the shadows danced too close. "I'm not asking you to stay forever," she said carefully. Each word measured, chosen. "Delay. A month. 2 months. Let them fortify. Build up their defenses. Train their own soldiers to take over." His mouth flattened into a line that held no give. "Fortify?" he repeated. "With what? Insults?" They knew we were leaving. They've known for years. The treaty had an end date written into it from the beginning. 80 years. Clear as words on parchment. And in all that time, what did they do to prepare? She opened her mouth, but he wasn't finished. They built nothing. Trained no one. Stockpiled no weapons. They relied on us completely, and now they'll pay the price for their own complacency. Their lack of preparedness is not for me and my people to fix. This is not about pride. It is entirely about pride." His voice dropped lower. Intimate, almost. But not gentle. "You would have us remain where we are despised? Where our children are called names in the streets? Where our women are spat on at the wells?" Marina opened her mouth. "And you would have him remain where we are despised?" The new voice cut through the air like a blade. Marina turned. Danielle stood just inside the doorway. She had not interrupted the warriors. They had continued packing around her, stepping past her like she was furniture. But her presence shifted the room regardless. The air itself seemed to rearrange itself around her. Her red hair was braided tightly now, pulled back from her face. Her training leathers bore faint dust from the yard, the knees slightly worn, the gloves tucked into her belt. She looked like she belonged in a place that valued steel over silk, sweat over perfume. Danielle's gaze settled on Marina. Not jealous, not hostile, assessing. The look of someone cataloging information, filing it away for later use. You ask him to bind our people longer to a kingdom that spits at our name, Danielle said evenly. No heat in her voice. Just fact. I ask him to prevent slaughter, Marina replied. Danielle stepped forward. Her boots made no sound on the packed earth floor. Slaughter of whom? Civilians. Families. People who had nothing to do with how the Goran were treated. Children who don't know what their parents said at wells. Danielle's jaw tightened slightly, the only crack in her composure. And where was Arinthia's concern when Goran children were denied water at public wells? When they were pushed in the mud and called half-breed bastards? When they went hungry because no one would sell to their mothers? The words landed harder than Marina expected. She flinched. Actually flinched, the way she hadn't when Nox touched her. The way she hadn't when she woke in a stranger's body. Because Danielle wasn't arguing from emotion. She was arguing from memory, from childhood wounds that had never healed. You think cruelty justifies catastrophe? Marina asked quietly. I think, Danielle said calmly, that a people cannot heal while chained to those who despise them. I think that staying only teaches the despisers that they can keep despising without consequence. I think that sometimes the only way to make someone stand on their own is to stop holding them up. Two worldviews, not enemies, but opposed. Marina saw it clearly now. Danielle believed in self-determination, in cutting away rot at the root, no matter how much healthy tissue came with it, in letting people face the consequences of their choices. Marina believed in mitigation, in reducing damage, in saving who could be saved, even if they didn't deserve it. Neither of them were wrong. That was the problem. Nox watched the exchange in silence. His gaze moved between them like a spectator at a match, weighing, calculating, deciding. Then he spoke. We leave at dawn tomorrow. Marina's heart stuttered. Dawn, not midday. Dawn. The shift of a few hours was small, barely anything in the scope of days. But it was something, a crack in the wall of his certainty. A concession, however tiny. Not for Arinthia, she knew, not for the kingdom or its people. For her, because she had asked. Because she had stood her ground. No more debate followed. The decision settled, like iron, immovable, final. Marina felt something inside her shift. She could not stop this. History was moving, a river too strong to divert, and it would not bend for pleading. She inclined her head once. Acknowledgement. Acceptance. Then I will not ask again. That seemed to surprise him. His brows lifted slightly, the only tell. But she had already turned, shoving her feet into her boots and stomping toward the door before he could respond. If she could not stop the wave, she would move ahead of it. Her father's shop smelled of dried herbs and spices, comforting. Familiar, the scent of childhood, of safety, of a life that was about to end, whether he believed her or not. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, a bright little sound that felt obscene given what she was about to say. Her father looked up from behind the counter. He was a broad-shouldered man, gone softer with age, his once strong frame settling into the comfortable padding of middle age. His hands bore ink stains from ledgers, the nails clean and blunt. His eyes were the same warm brown she remembered from 100 small moments, teaching her to read prices, showing her how to weigh spices, ruffling her hair when she got the sums right. Her heart clenched. Back in her world, she never had a father. He had died when she was less than a year old, nothing but a photograph on the mantel and stories her mother told on birthdays. It had always been just her and her mother, the two of them against the world. Her mother. Good God. She wondered how her mother was coping with her death. If she'd been told yet. If she was sitting in their apartment right now, staring at nothing, unable to understand why her daughter hadn't come home. Marina. Her father's voice pulled her back. You're early. I thought you'd be with. He stopped, clearly reconsidering whatever he'd been about to say. She closed the door firmly behind her. The bell chimed again, a final little note. We need to leave. He blinked. Leave what? Arinthia. He laughed once, a short, surprised sound, then saw her expression, and stopped. Why? She moved closer. Her boots left damp marks on the wooden floor from the snow outside. The borders will start falling. Trade routes will be unstable. Grain prices have risen 3 times in 2 months. His brows drew together. That happens in winter. Supply lines freeze. It's normal. This is not winter strain. She kept her voice calm, measured. This is collapse. The infrastructure is failing because the Goran have been propping it up for 80 years, and no one else knows how. He stared at her. You've seen the tension in the capital, she pressed. The lords arguing openly in the streets. The guard rotations cut back because there's no money to pay them. The king hiding in his chambers while rumors spread. He didn't interrupt. You know the Goran are leaving. His mouth tightened. Yes. Everyone knows that. It's all anyone talks about in the market. Once they go, the North will test the border within weeks, maybe days. He exhaled slowly, looked at her in a new light. She could see it in his eyes, the recalculation. His daughter sounded different. Head less in the clouds, more confident, more sober. That is speculation, he said. But his voice lacked conviction. It is logic. She leaned forward slightly, bracing her hands on the counter between them. Food shortages, weakening patrols, political infighting, with no one strong enough to stop it. You taught me to read markets, father. I know you think I never paid attention, but I did. I watched you work. I learned what happens when protection vanishes. His silence stretched longer now. When instability meets opportunity, she continued, violence follows. Always. Every time in history, the strong take from the weak, and right now, Arinthia is weak. Her younger brother appeared from the back room, frowning. He was 14, all gangly limbs and 2 large feet, with their mother's dark hair and their father's serious eyes. You sound like a general. His voice held a teenager's contempt for anything that disrupted normalcy. You're spending too much time with your boyfriend. I sound like someone who doesn't want us dead, she said evenly. And he is not my boyfriend. That startled them both. Her father's eyes sharpened. The shift in her language, her tone, her entire bearing. He was too sharp a man not to notice. Dead? He repeated. Invasion, she said plainly. Looting. Fires. The kind of chaos that follows when power vacuums meet hungry neighbors. We will not be spared because we sell spices. We'll be targets. We have goods. We have a building. We have women. Her mother stepped in from the stairwell, drawn by the raised voices. Her hands were flour-dusted from baking, her apron tied hastily. What are you saying? Marina inhaled slowly. This was the moment. We go with the Goran, her brother scoffed. The sound was ugly, dismissive. They hate us. Some do, she admitted. Some won't ever accept us. But they value strength, skill, contribution. They're not savages, they're survivors. And survivors respect useful people. Her father studied her. You believe this? Yes. There was no tremor in her voice, no panic, just certainty. And that, more than anything, made him listen. He looked around his shop, at the shelves lined with jars and bundles, at the ledgers recording decades of trade, at the life built carefully, slowly, over years of work. Then back at her. How soon? Dawn. His brows lifted sharply. Tomorrow? Yes. Silence filled the room. The fire crackled. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Then, pack essentials, he said quietly. Her brother stared. Father, pack. The word was final. Clothes, food, coin, documents, nothing we can't carry. Marina's knees nearly buckled with relief, but she didn't show it. Not yet. By the time she returned to the encampment, the sky had darkened to deep blue. Torches flickered along the perimeter, casting dancing shadows on the snow. The tribe was behind schedule. She could feel the tension in the air, the sharpness of voices, the way people move faster than before. She found Knox near the supply wagons, speaking sharply to 2 warriors. His voice carried in the cold air. We depart regardless, he was saying. Delay weakens resolve. Every hour we linger is an hour for doubt to spread. She approached. He noticed immediately. His gaze swept over her face, cataloging, assessing. What now? My family and I will come. He stared at her. No, it was flat, final. They are merchants. She kept her voice calm, reasonable. They bring trade knowledge, preservation techniques, inventory management, skills your people will need when you're not just surviving, but building. We are not building a market. You are building a kingdom. The words slipped out before she could stop them. He went still, slowly. A kingdom, he repeated. In time. She held his gaze. You're not just fleeing, Knox. You're founding. 80 years of service, and what do you have to show for it? Scars and contempt. But out there, she gestured toward the mountains. Out there, you can build something that's yours. Something that lasts. And you'll need more than warriors to do it. His gaze narrowed slightly. You presume much. You will need civilians, she pressed. You will need people who know more than war. Farmers. Healers. Builders. Traders. My family can be the beginning of that. He stepped closer. The torchlight carved his features in shadow and gold. No Arinthians will travel within my ranks. We will not travel as Arinthians. And what will you travel as? She met his eyes. Whatever you need us to be. He hesitated. She saw it. The calculation behind his eyes. The understanding that refusing her might fracture something between them, something he hadn't realized he valued until this moment. His jaw tightened. You travel at the rear, reluctant. Controlled. A concession that cost him something. But hear me, Marina. His voice dropped, intimate and dangerous. If you cause unrest, if my people object, if your family proves more trouble than they're worth, I will not defend you and yours over my tribe. You will be on your own. That is fair. His gaze lingered on her face, searching for something. You are certain? Yes, Dawn, he said. If you are not here when we ride, you are left. I will not wait. I understand. She turned to go. Marina. She paused. He studied her face again, searching for something that wasn't there. The softness, the eager compliance, the easy smile that Marina Vale had always worn for him. She didn't offer him a smile, didn't reach for him, didn't soften, and something about that seemed to unsettle him more than her arguments had. Her relief lasted only until she reached home. The door opened to reveal chaos. Her mother's sister stood in the center of the room, arguing in rapid whispers. Two children clung to her skirts, their faces scared and confused. Her father's brother was hauling sacks down from the loft, his movements jerky with panic. Marina froze. You told them? She asked her father. How could we not? His voice was tired. Their family. We couldn't just leave without warning them. Her aunt turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face blotchy with crying. We are not staying to burn, she said sharply. If you're going, we're going. Marina's mind raced. This was not what she had negotiated. She had asked for her family. Her parents. Her brother. The core unit she could justify as essential. Not extended kin. Not aunts and uncles and cousins. Not children who would slow the march and require resources. How was she going to explain this to Knox? She pressed her fingers to her temple. One problem at a time. Fine, she said. But listen to me carefully. We travel light. One bag each, only what you can carry. No arguments, no sentiment. If you can't carry it, you leave it. Her aunt opened her mouth. No, Marina cut her off. I mean it. The Goran won't wait for us. If you slow them down, they'll leave you. And if they leave you, you die. So pack smart or stay here and take your chances. The room went quiet. Her aunt closed her mouth. Her father's brother stopped hauling sacks. And for the first time, they looked at her not as the flighty girl who chased a barbarian, but as someone who knew something they didn't. Night fell. The camp quieted into low murmurs and distant horses shifting. The sounds of a people trying to sleep before the longest day of their lives. Marina returned to the longhouse to retrieve the last of her things. A few items of clothing. A warm cloak she'd spotted earlier. A small knife she'd hidden in the furs days ago. She stepped inside. And stopped. Knox was there. Alone. He was removing his gauntlets slowly, deliberately, pulling each finger free with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. The firelight played across his bare arms, catching the scars, the corded muscle, the veins that ran beneath his skin. You are late, he said without looking up. I was securing arrangements. His eyes flicked over her. Assessing. And yet you did not seek my bed. There was no teasing in it, no flirtation. Just observation. Fact. She met his gaze steadily. Our arrangement ends tonight. He stilled. The second gauntlet paused halfway off his hand. Ends. Yes. He took a step toward her. You came to me freely, and I leave freely. His eyes darkened. The gold in them seemed to deepen, to heat. You presume I dismiss you so easily. She inhaled slowly. Kept her voice level. You were prepared to ride at dawn and never look back. You made that clear. I was warm. I was willing. I was convenient. But I was never part of your future. His jaw tightened. You think I did not care? I think, she said softly, that you never intended for me to join you. Not really. If I hadn't asked, if I hadn't pushed, I would have woken tomorrow to an empty bed and a cold fire, and you would have been halfway to the mountains before I realized you were gone. That hit harder than she expected. He reached for her. She flinched. Instinct. Automatic. Before she could stop herself, his hand froze mid-air. Something flickered in his expression. Irritation. Confusion. Something else she couldn't name. You really will not have me? He asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. You were planning to leave without me. Her tone did not waver, and that unsettled him. Because Marina Vale had never spoken like this, had never met his gaze without softening, had never stood her ground when he stepped into her space. He was looking at a stranger wearing a familiar face. She turned away. "I will be here at dawn." She walked out before he could answer. Behind her, she felt his gaze burn into her back. Not dismissive, not indifferent, unsettled. In the training yard, Danielle sparred under torchlight. Blades clashed. Boots struck dirt. Breath misted in the cold air as warriors pushed each other through drills, burning off the tension of waiting. Marina paused to watch. Danielle moved with precision. No wasted motion, no flourish. Every strike had purpose. Every block had intent. She fought like someone who had learned that hesitation meant death. One of the warriors, young, overeager, misjudged a strike. Steel bit into his forearm. He hissed, dropped his sword, clutched the wound as blood welled between his fingers. Danielle stepped back instantly, her face shifting from focus to concern. "I'm sorry, I didn't." Marina moved before she thought. "Hold still." The warrior blinked at her. His eyes widened slightly, probably surprised that the chief's bedmate was speaking to him at all. She knelt in the snow beside him. The cold immediately soaked through her dress, but she ignored it. Tore a strip from the clean linen she'd taken from her father's shop. Poured water from the nearby bucket over the wound first, washing away blood and dirt. "Clean before pressure," she said quietly. "Infection sets in fast if you don't flush it." The warrior watched her hands. Steady. Efficient. Shocked. Everyone knew her as their chief's bedmate, a pretty warm body with no sense between her eyes. Someone to tolerate, not respect. But her hands knew what they were doing. "You know this?" he asked. "Yes." Danielle observed silently from a few feet away. Her sword hung loose in her hand. Forgotten. Marina tied the final knot with practiced ease. Not too tight, not too loose. Just enough pressure to stem the bleeding without cutting off circulation. "Change the bandage tomorrow. If it swells, loosen it. If it turns red around the edges, find a healer." The warrior flexed his fingers. Tested the bindings. "Thank you." The word carried. Others noticed. Warriors paused in their drills, watching. Whispers followed. Not of beauty, not of flirtation, of skill. Marina straightened. Brushed snow from her knees. Met Danielle's eyes across the yard. No hostility there, just curiosity. Sharp and assessing, Danielle inclined her head slightly. Acknowledgement, perhaps. Or warning. It was hard to tell. The night air felt different now. The lines were shifting. Power was redefining itself. And somewhere in the dark behind her, in the longhouse where the fire still burned, Knox was still awake and thinking. Chapter 3. Departure. Dawn came merciless and pale. Marina had not slept. The camp stirred before the sun broke the horizon. Low murmurs, horses snorting clouds of steam into the freezing air, and the rhythmic creak of leather straps pulled tight one final time. These were the sounds of a people who had done this before, who knew the weight of leaving and the cost of looking back. The Goran did not linger. They were a people who moved the moment they decided to move. Marina stood beside her family's cart and felt irritation coil tight in her chest. 2 horses. A full cart. Stacked high. Barrels. Bundles. Crates tied with rope that looked far too optimistic for mountain roads. Sacks of grain bulging at the seams. Bundles of fabric wrapped in oilcloth. A wooden chest that likely held her mother's good dishes, because of course it did. She closed her eyes briefly. "I said travel light." Her father did not look guilty. He looked practical. He wore the expression of a man who had spent 40 years running a business and knew exactly what could be argued and what could not. A 3-month journey is not a morning stroll, Marina. Her mother adjusted a bundle of blankets, tucking the edges tighter against the cold. Her movements were efficient and practiced. The same hands that had packed 1,000 orders for customers who needed their spices delivered on time. "You said the mountains are harsh. That food is uncertain. We cannot survive on practicality alone. We survive on food, warm clothes, and thick tarps to keep out the wind, snow, and rain." Her uncle cleared his throat from where he stood near the horses, checking their harnesses for the 3rd time. He was a quiet man, her father's brother, with the same broad shoulders and the same ink-stained hands. He had never remarried after his wife died in childbirth with their first child, and he carried that loss in the way he moved, careful and deliberate, as if afraid of breaking something else. "And we are not warriors," he added. "We do not know how to live off the land. We know how to trade, how to preserve, and how to make things last. That's what we've packed." Marina pinched the bridge of her nose. "You won't survive if the cart breaks an axle during the 2nd week, and we won't survive if we starve in the 6th, her father replied calmly. She stopped arguing, because he wasn't wrong. She looked at the cart again, really looking this time, instead of just seeing the chaos. Dried goods were stacked in careful layers. Preserved meats were wrapped in salt-crusted cloth. Spices sat in small, valuable packets. Cinnamon, cloves, and pepper, worth their weight in silver anywhere they went. There was fabric for trade, for mending, and for barter. Seeds were wrapped in paper, carefully labeled in her father's precise handwriting. There were tools that could be used or sold. It was not indulgence. It was preparation. A merchant's instinct, honed over decades of knowing that the difference between profit and ruin was often just a matter of planning. And damn it, he was right. She exhaled slowly, watching her breath fog in the cold air. Fine, but if something has to be abandoned on the road, we do not argue. No sentiment. No, but your grandmother gave me that. If it slows us down, it goes. Her father nodded once. Agreed. Her mother caught her eye and smiled. It was a small thing. Tired, worried, and proud all at once. Around them, the Goran mounted their steeds. Armor glinted in the weak morning light, leather and steel, scarred and dented from use. Braided hair swung against broad shoulders. Scarred faces stared straight ahead, ignoring the Arinthians who had begun to gather along the streets. Every movement was efficient, practiced, and precise. And then, the gates opened. The caravan began to move. Arinthians lined the streets as the first wagons rolled through. They had come to watch, Marina realized. To witness, to make sure the savages actually left. She kept her chin level as the jeers started. Good riddance. Take your filth with you. Barbarians, go back to whatever cave you crawled out of. Someone threw a clump of mud. It splattered uselessly against a wagon wheel, the frozen dirt crumbling on impact. Laughter followed. Celebration. Like a festival. Marina watched the Goran faces as they rode past. Impassive, but their spines straightened. Their silence grew heavier. Behind her, her aunt shrank lower in the cart, pulling her two children closer. The little girl, 8 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her father's serious eyes, pressed her face into her mother's coat. The boy, barely 6, stared with wide eyes at the shouting crowd, not understanding why the people were so angry. Her aunt was a widow. Her husband had died 3 years ago in a trading accident, leaving her with 2 children and a small shop that barely kept them fed. She was following her remaining family into the unknown, because the alternative was staying alone in a city that was closing its heart. Her uncle's jaw tightened as a clot of mud hit near his feet. He didn't respond. He just kept walking beside the cart, steady and silent. Marina didn't look back. She only watched the city fade behind them. Arinthia did not know it was cheering at its own funeral. The sad part was that not every Arinthian was prejudiced. There were some like her parents, like her uncle and aunt, who had never viewed or treated the Goran in a horrible way. They were people who traded with them fairly, who nodded in the streets instead of spitting, who understood that 80 years of protection meant something. But they were the minority. And now they were leaving too. The road north was hard before it became worse. The first days were disciplined. The formation remained tight, wagons centered, with scouts riding ahead and behind. The Goran moved like a single organism, each person knowing their place without being told. Warriors flanked the column, alert for threats. Women walked beside the wagons, carrying children when they tired. The elderly rode in the carts, wrapped in furs, their faces turned toward the mountains. Danielle trained with the warriors at every Marina noticed. Danielle did not need to prove herself anymore, but she did anyway. Sword drills at dusk when the camp stopped, her blade flashing in the firelight. Sparring until her palms blistered and her breath came in gasps. Running endurance drills through uneven terrain, pushing herself harder than anyone asked her to. She bled without complaint. And Nox watched. Not constantly, but enough. Enough that Marina saw it, a glance that lingered half a second too long. A correction offered more gently than to others. A pause when Danielle spoke, as if her words carried more weight than anyone else's. It was the beginning of something. At night, Danielle often sat near the main fire, speaking with him about terrain strategy and possible settlement regions. Her voice carried in the quiet, confident, knowledgeable, the voice of someone who had studied maps and learned from people who knew the land. Marina did not intrude. She stepped back. She observed. She adjusted. Instead of seeking proximity to Nox, she began circulating through the camp. She checked minor cuts on children who'd tripped on rocks. She cleaned wounds properly instead of the hasty wrappings she'd seen some warriors use. She insisted on boiling water before it was stored, explaining to the women who handled supplies that clean water meant fewer fevers. She showed mothers how to wrap infants more securely against the cold, using techniques she'd learned in a world that didn't exist here. At first, the women were wary. She was the chief's bedmate, the pretty Arinthian who warmed his furs. Not someone to trust with real things. Then, curiosity crept in. The cuts she cleaned didn't fester. The children she wrapped didn't shiver as much at night. The water she boiled didn't make anyone sick. Then came the gratitude. "Where did you learn this?" an older woman asked one evening, watching Marina check a child's scraped knee. Marina hesitated. "From my grandmother," she said. It was the closest thing to truth she could offer. The woman nodded. "She taught you well." Something warm flickered in Marina's chest. The first true test came on the 9th day. A child, barely 5, with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile, collapsed before midday. Skin flushed, breath shallow, eyes glassy and unfocused. His mother's scream cut through the column like a blade. Panic spread faster than the fever. Danielle reached him first. Without hesitation, she lifted the boy into her arms and carried him the remaining miles to camp when the caravan halted early. She didn't ask. She didn't wait for permission. She just moved, her face set in grim determination, the boy's weight nothing in her arms. Marina was already moving. "Lay him flat." Danielle set him down on a pile of furs, her hands gentle, despite their strength. The boy's mother collapsed beside him, sobbing, reaching for his face. Marina touched his forehead. Too hot, burning, dehydrated. "How long?" she demanded. "Since morning," the mother cried. "He would not drink. He never likes to drink anything when it's cold, and I couldn't make him, and I thought it would pass, I thought." Marina's mind shifted gears. Annoyance flickered through her. If they'd found her earlier, if they'd trusted her sooner, but she pushed it down. Blame could wait. The boy couldn't. The people here couldn't continue operating on medieval healer logic. Leeches, prayer, and hoping for the best would not suffice. She had knowledge they didn't. She had to use it. She applied modern emergency protocol. "Strip the furs." Gasps erupted around her. "It's freezing." "He is overheating." Her tone brooked no argument. "His body temperature is too high. Wrapping him will cook him from the inside." She sent someone for water. Clean water. She forced small sips into the boy's mouth between cooling compresses along his neck and wrists. The skin there was thin, the blood close to the surface. Cooling those areas would cool his core faster. "Slowly," she murmured. "Small amounts. Don't let him choke." Danielle knelt nearby, watching every movement. Her gray eyes tracked Marina's hands, cataloging and learning. The warriors watched too. Marina ignored them. Time stretched. The sun moved across the sky. The camp remained still, waiting. No one suggested moving on. The boy convulsed once. His mother screamed. Danielle's hand tightened on his shoulder, steadying him, keeping him from hurting himself. Her face was pale, but her grip didn't waver. Marina did not stop working. "Stay with me," she murmured to the child. "Breathe. That's it. Stay with me." She adjusted the compresses. She checked his pulse. She listened to his breathing. It took hours. By sunset, the fever broke. The boy's skin cooled. His breathing steadied. His eyes fluttered open, confused and tired, but aware. "Mama?" His voice was small. His mother collapsed over him, sobbing with relief. The boy slept, alive. A murmur spread through the tribe. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. But something shifted. Danielle met Marina's eyes across the fire. There was respect there. Clear and unambiguous. It wasn't rivalry. It was recognition. The tribe saw it too. Danielle's strength had carried the boy. Her speed, her decisiveness, and her willingness to act had gotten him to safety. Marina's knowledge had saved him. Her hands, her training, and her understanding of things no one here knew had pulled him back from the brink. Two forms of power. Both were necessary. After that, Knox began asking questions, not in front of everyone, quietly, strategically. He'd find her during the evening meal, or while she was checking supplies, or while she was walking the perimeter when sleep wouldn't come. How much water should be stored per person for a long march? What signs show infection before it spreads? How many days before meat spoils if salted properly? How do you tell if a wound is healing or rotting? Marina answered calmly, logically, without arrogance, without flirting, without offering anything but information. He listened. He truly listened. She could see him filing the answers away, adjusting his plans, and recalculating based on what she told him. One evening, he approached her while she was inspecting a supply ledger her father had begun compiling for the tribe's goods. Her father had offered his services as a quartermaster, and the Goran, practical people, had accepted. "You organize this differently," he said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because if you don't separate consumption from reserves, you won't know when you're in danger until it's too late. This column is what we need daily. This column is what we can't touch unless there's an emergency. This column is what we can trade or barter if we need something we didn't bring." He studied her. The firelight reflected in his eyes, turning them to molten gold. "You speak as though you have done this before." "In another life," she said before she could stop herself. His brow furrowed. She softened the tension quickly. "In theory. I read a lot. My father taught me some." He stepped closer. He wasn't invading her space. He was just near enough that she felt the heat of him, the warmth that radiated from his body despite the cold. "You look the same," he said slowly. Her pulse ticked once. He ran a finger along her cheek, feather-light, and then pulled it away. She shivered. From want, her body remembered this man too well. It remembered his hands, his mouth, and the weight of him pressing her into the furs. It remembered the sounds she'd made, the way she'd clung to him, and the complete surrender of those nights. "You feel the same." A pause. "But you are not the woman who laughed in my bed." The air between them tightened. Marina met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps people change," she said, "and there isn't always a logical explanation. Perhaps things happen that we can't explain, and we just have to live with the results." He watched her for a long moment, searching, probing. It was as if he were trying to peel back her skin and see what had replaced the girl he thought he knew. That unsettled him more than anger would have. He exhaled slowly. "And what changed you?" She held his eyes. Being left behind. Something flickered there. Regret? No. Recognition. He understood what she meant, even if he didn't know the full truth. He had been ready to leave her. He would have, if she hadn't fought. He did not reach for her, and she did not offer herself. That restraint vibrated more heavily than any shared bed. The journey grew harsher. Mountain paths narrowed until the wagons barely fit. Winds cut sharper, biting through furs and leather. Snow fell more often, dusting the column white and erasing the path behind them. The Goran adapted. They always did. Danielle continued earning admiration through sheer endurance. She trained alongside the men without asking for exception. When a wagon wheel broke on a rock, she helped lift the corner so it could be replaced. When a scout returned injured from a fall, she rode back out with the replacement patrol without being asked. When children cried from the cold, she walked beside their mothers and told stories to distract them. Knox rode often beside her now. They discussed settlement strategy. They talked about water sources they'd need to find. They looked for defensible cliffs where they could build. They scouted passes that would be easier to guard. Marina watched. There was attraction there. It wasn't hidden. Danielle's fire matched his. Challenge met challenge. Steel met steel, sparking with every exchange. And yet, he found himself drifting toward Marina at quieter hours. Not to touch, not to claim, but to talk. He asked her opinion on ration schedules, on rotating watch shifts to reduce fatigue, on whether pregnant women should ride or walk, on how to treat the frostbite that was beginning to appear on exposed skin. He had never asked her opinion before. "Not like this," she answered without flirtation, without seeking praise, without offering anything but clear, practical information. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. Because desire he understood. The pull of a warm body, the comfort of familiar touch, the release of tension in the dark, those were easy. This was different. This was reliance. One night, he found her sitting alone near the edge of camp, watching the stars. The fire was behind her, the cold ahead. She'd wrapped herself in a heavy cloak, her breath misting in the air. He sat beside her without asking. "You avoid me," he said. "I give you space." "I did not ask for space." She glanced at him. "We are done, Knox. We were done the moment you decided to leave without me." A faint irritation crossed his face. "And yet you followed." "I chose survival." She looked back at the stars. "My survival. My family's survival. Not you." His eyes narrowed slightly. "And what do you choose now?" She considered the question. She didn't give the easy answer. Not the flirtatious answer. She gave him the truth. "I choose usefulness." She gestured vaguely toward the camp. "The tribe needs healers. It needs organizers. It needs people who can make supplies last and keep children alive. That's what I can offer. That's what I choose." He was silent for a long moment. "That is all?" "That is enough." The words lingered between them. He did not press further. But when he walked away, he did not go toward Danielle. He went to stand alone at the edge of camp, looking out at the mountains. And for the first time since they had left Arinthia, Goran felt torn. Not between two women, but between two futures. One was forged in fire and battle, and the kind of passion that burned bright and fast. One was built on quiet calculation, steady hands, practical knowledge, and the slow accumulation of trust. He did not yet know which would endure longer. The daily rhythm of the journey settled into something almost routine. Wake before dawn. Strike camp. Eat whatever could be eaten cold. Walk until the sun was high, then walk more. Stop only when the light failed. Repeat. Marina's family found their place in the chaos. Her father worked with the quartermasters, his merchant's eye for inventory proving invaluable. He could look at a pile of supplies and know exactly how long they'd last, what they'd need next, what could be traded, and what must be kept. Her mother walked among the women, sharing food and stories, learning names and faces. She had a gift for making people comfortable, for smoothing tensions before they became conflicts. The Goran women, wary at first, began to seek her out. Her uncle helped with the horses and wagons, his quiet competence earning grudging respect from warriors who had expected Arinthians to be useless. Her aunt watched over the children, not just her own, but any who needed watching. She organized games to keep them moving, sang songs to keep them from crying, and told stories to keep them from fear. Even her brother found a place, running messages between scouts in the camp, small and fast and eager to help. And Marina healed. She treated cuts and bruises, fevers and chills, frostbite on fingers and toes. She handled the endless small injuries of a hard journey through harsh land. She worked until her hands cramped and her back ached, until she forgot what it felt like to be warm, until the faces blurred together and she could only think in terms of symptoms and treatments. But she remembered their names. Every single one. Kale, the warrior whose hand she'd bandaged after a training accident. Sarah, the woman whose baby she'd helped deliver during the 3rd week. Small and screaming and perfect. Torin, the old man whose cough she'd treated with honey and herbs, watching his breathing ease over 3 days. Mira, the little girl who'd fallen and gashed her knee, who now ran to Marina every evening to show her that it was healing. The names piled up. The trust grew. One evening, Danielle found her at the medical supplies, organizing bandages by size and material. "You work too hard," Danielle said. Marina glanced up. "So do you." Danielle smiled slightly. It was the first real smile Marina had seen from her. "Fair." She leaned against a nearby wagon, watching. "The tribe speaks of you. Good things, I hope. Curious things." Danielle's gray eyes were sharp. "They say you know things you shouldn't, that you heal like someone twice your age, that you speak of medicine like you've studied for years, not just learned from grandmothers." Marina's hands stilled on a bandage. "They say many things." "They do?" Danielle pushed off from the wagon, stepping closer. "I've learned to listen to what they say. Patterns emerge. Truths surface." Marina met her eyes. "What truth do you see?" Danielle studied her for a long moment. "I see someone who doesn't quite fit. Someone who watches more than she should. Someone who knows things." She tilted her head. "I also see someone who saved a child's life without hesitation. Someone who works until she drops. Someone who doesn't ask for credit or praise." She stepped closer still. "I don't know what you are," Danielle said quietly. "But I know you're not what you pretend to be." The air between them went still. Marina held her gaze. "No," she said. "I'm not." Danielle nodded slowly. "Good." She turned to go, then paused. "The tribe needs people who are more than they seem. The mountains don't care about pretense." She walked away into the darkness. Marina stood alone among her supplies, heart pounding. She had not stopped history, but she had begun bending it. It was frightening, because she felt like she was intruding on territory that wasn't hers. It was like she'd walked into someone else's story and started rewriting the lines. But the child was alive. The tribe was trusting her. The family she'd never had in her first life was real and warm and here. And somewhere in the darkness, Nox Goran was thinking about her. Not as a warm body, not as a convenient bedmate, but as someone whose opinion mattered. The mountains loomed ahead, white and indifferent. Arinthia was gone. The tribe was changing. And Marina was becoming something new. Something that didn't exist in the original story. Something that might, just might, survive. Chapter 4. Ashes and Water. The news came on the 22nd day. It arrived at dusk, carried by a lone rider whose horse collapsed the moment he dismounted. The animal's sides heaved, foam streaking its coat and legs trembling with the effort of a journey that had pushed it past endurance. It would not rise again. The camp had just begun settling for the night, fires crackling, furs being spread, and the first pots of the evening meal hanging over flames, when the scout stumbled through the outer ring of warriors. Blood had dried along his temple in a dark crust. His cloak hung in torn ribbons, shredded by branches or blades. It was impossible to tell which. "From the south," someone called. The word rippled through the camp like wind through dry grass. Nox was already moving. Marina felt it before she understood it, a cold tightening in her chest. It was the kind of instinct that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with knowing, deep in her bones, that the world had just shifted. The rider dropped to one knee before Nox could reach him. His breath came in gasps, visible in the freezing air. "They came faster than we calculated," he rasped. "Northern banners. 3 lords united." The air shifted. Everything stopped. The crackle of fires, the murmur of conversation, the distant sound of horses shifting in their pickets. All of it died. "How long after we left?" Nox demanded. His voice was low, but it carried. 2 weeks. The scout's voice broke on the words. "Maybe less. They were already massing when we rode. We didn't see. We couldn't." Too fast. Even the Goran, who had spent 80 years watching Arinthian borders, had not expected that. They had calculated months, maybe half a year of infighting before the north moved. Not 2 weeks. Not an organized assault before the kingdom even realized it was vulnerable. They broke through the outer defenses in 3 days, the scout continued. The capital fell in 4. Silence. Total. The kind of silence that pressed against eardrums, making the world feel hollow. The scout swallowed hard, his throat moving visibly. There was no organized retreat. The gates were opened from within. Betrayal. Someone inside had sold them, trading the city for safety, silver, or spite. The king? Danielle asked. She had appeared at Nox's shoulder, silent as a shadow, her gray eyes hard. Dead. The word struck like a blade against bone. Executed publicly. In the main square, they made his family watch. A murmur rippled through the tribe. It wasn't loud. It was more like a collective intake of breath, held too long. And the slaughter? Nox pressed. His face was stone, but his hands, Marina saw them, were clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. The scout's jaw tightened. Worse than rumor. Marina felt the world tilt. She already knew this. She had read it in another life, curled on her couch with a cup of tea, crying over words on a page. She had known the capital would fall, known the king would die, and known the streets would run red. But knowing was different from hearing it spoken aloud. Knowing was different from watching the faces around her fracture. Executions in the streets, the scout said, his voice flat and mechanical. He was reciting because he had to, not because he wanted to. Anyone who resisted. Anyone who looked wealthy. Anyone who looked useful. His voice dropped. Women taken. Children. He stopped. He didn't have to finish. Marina closed her eyes. It was exactly as she remembered. Not slower, not prevented. It was only slightly altered because she had moved her family in time. Around her, the Goran stood stunned. Not because Arinthia had fallen, they had known it would, had prepared for it, and had accepted it as inevitable, but because it had fallen so quickly, so soon, one warrior muttered. He was a young man, barely 20, who had been born in Arinthia and known no other home. They lasted 80 years with us guarding them, another said quietly. He was older and scarred, the kind of man who had seen too much. Without us, they lasted 4 days. Danielle's hands were clenched at her sides. She did not look triumphant or vindicated. She looked grim. She had chosen to leave and had spoken harsh words about Arinthia's failures. But this was not victory. This was confirmation of horror. Nox stood utterly still. His face revealed nothing, but Marina knew him well enough now to recognize the fracture beneath it. The slight tightening at the corners of his eyes, the way his breathing had gone shallow and controlled. They had calculated months, maybe half a year. Not 2 weeks. He turned slowly, his gaze finding Marina across the gathering. It wasn't a coincidence, it was recognition. You knew. She had warned him. Food shortages, weak borders, political instability, the speed at which collapse would come once the keystone was removed. He had thought she was cautious. He had not understood she was prescient. The tribe slowly dispersed into low, heavy murmurs. People drifted toward their own fires and families, carrying the weight of news that would take days to fully comprehend. The illusion of distance was gone. Arinthia was not behind them. It was ash. That night, no one slept easily. Grief rolled through the camp in waves. Even those who had been insulted and spat on, whose children had been denied water at public wells, and whose wives had been called names in the streets, even they felt it. 80 years of shared soil, of blood spilled for fields that were not theirs, of children born and buried in the shadow of those gray stone walls. And now, gone. Danielle sat beside the central fire with Nox. They spoke in low tones, their heads bent together over a roughly drawn map. Strategy. Next steps. The North would consolidate power now. The lords who had united against Arinthia would turn on each other eventually. They always did, but for now, they would hunt. Refugees might scatter toward the mountains, fleeing the slaughter. They would need to prepare for that, deciding whom to let in and whom to turn away. Danielle's voice burned steady and fierce. Even from a distance, Marina could hear the conviction in it. We build stronger, she said. We build where no one can touch us. Cliffs they can't climb, passes we can guard, a place that can only be reached by people who know the way. Fire. Immediate, visible, and necessary. Marina watched from the shadows, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She should feel vindicated, but she didn't. She felt hollow. Her father approached quietly. He had aged in the weeks since they left. They all had. But tonight he looked older still. The news had carved new lines into his face. "We would have died," he said softly. She swallowed. "Yes." He rested a hand briefly on her shoulder. The weight of it was warm and grounding. "I do not know how you knew." She didn't answer, and he didn't press. He simply squeezed her shoulder once and walked away, back toward the cart where her mother waited and where her brother slept, unaware of how close death had come. Her family lived because she had interfered, because she had intruded on a story that was not originally hers, but the capital had still burned. Thousands had died. Children she might have saved if she'd been braver, faster, sooner. She could not save everyone. The weight of that settled deep in her chest, heavy as stone. Later, long after most had withdrawn into tents and furs, she felt him approach. She did not turn. She knew his footsteps now. The rhythm and the weight of them. "You were right." His voice was low. It wasn't accusing or defensive. It was just honest. She stared out at the dark stretch of mountain silhouettes, the peaks black against a star-scattered sky. "I wish I hadn't been," she replied. He stood beside her. He wasn't touching or claiming her, just present. "They lasted 4 days," he said quietly. "Without us." She did not answer. After a moment, he said, "I thought I understood consequence." His jaw tightened. "I did not think it would be that swift." She looked at him then. The firelight did something to him tonight. It carved the sharp edges softer and exposed something beneath the war chief exterior that he usually kept hidden. Grief, perhaps. Or guilt. The weight of knowing that 80 years of blood had bought only 4 days of resistance. "Would you have stayed?" she asked gently. "No." The answer was immediate and certain. And yet, he finished. He exhaled slowly, his breath misting in the cold air. "You did not argue to bind us to them. No. You argued to prepare." "Yes." Silence stretched between them, and something shifted. It wasn't desire. Not yet. It was recognition. Danielle would lead a charge into flame without hesitation. She would meet danger head-on, sword drawn and fury blazing. That was her gift, her purpose, and her nature. Marina would build a wall against the wind, long before the fire reached it. She would stockpile supplies, train healers, and calculate ration schedules so that when the flame came, there was something left afterward. Fire was glorious. Water endured. He studied her profile in the dim light. She could feel his gaze on her skin, tracing the line of her jaw and the curve of her shoulder. "You have been shaping this tribe," he said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a realization. "You have been doing it quietly." Marina's pulse fluttered. "I have been doing what needed doing. You have been building while I have been marching." That landed heavier than he intended. She turned fully toward him. "And she?" Marina asked softly. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Danielle is strength," he said without hesitation. "She is fury when fury is needed. And I?" His eyes darkened, and the gold in them seemed to deepen in heat. "You are calm when calm is needed." He stepped closer, and the space between them narrowed. "You see 5 steps ahead. You think in layers, supplies, healing, children, stability. You look at a problem, and you see the solution before anyone else has finished describing it." His voice lowered further. "You are not flame, Marina." His fingers brushed her wrist lightly. The touch was electric, sending heat shooting up her arm. "You are tied." The contact burned. Her body reacted instantly, traitorous and aching, remembering every night she had spent in his arms before everything changed. Before she became someone else. She pulled her hand back. "You should not say that." "Why?" "Because this is not how it was meant to go." His gaze sharpened. "I do not live by what was meant to go." But she did. In the original story, this was where he and Danielle grew inseparable. They would share anger, share rebuilding, and share a bed as the nights grew cold and the need for warmth became something more. Marina had not existed beyond being an ornament. A pretty face, a warm body, a lesson he learned before finding the real thing. Now she stood between that inevitability, and she hated the way her body responded when he stepped closer again. "I will not steal something that is forming," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. "You think I am so easily claimed?" "No," she whispered. "I think she deserves something unshadowed, something that isn't complicated by history and obligation and—" "And you?" he interrupted. "What do you deserve?" The question stopped her cold. No one had asked her that, not once since she woke in this body. What did she deserve? "I don't know," she admitted. Something flared in his expression. It wasn't anger, it was something more dangerous. He reached for her again. This time, when his fingers slid into her hair, cupping the back of her head, she did not flinch. She did not pull away. "Do not decide my heart for me," he said roughly. Her breath caught. I do not choose lightly. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, slow, intentional, watching her face for any sign of resistance. You speak of intrusion, he murmured, as if you are an outsider. A pause. You are the reason families sleep easier. You are the reason children live. His forehead rested briefly against hers. The contact was gentle, almost reverent. You are the reason I look at the future differently. Her resolve fractured. She had tried. For weeks, she had tried to stay disciplined, rational, and strategic. She had stepped back and given space, letting Danielle fill the role the story had written for her. But the grief of tonight had cracked something open. The knowledge that death had been so close that her family could have burned, would have burned if she hadn't moved, made everything sharper. More urgent, more real. He kissed her. It wasn't possessive or demanding, but deep and searching, like he was trying to find something in the shape of her mouth and the taste of her lips. She meant to step back. She meant to remember Danielle. She meant to hold the line. Instead, she grabbed his cloak and pulled him closer. The kiss turned fierce and hungry, not just for each other, but for proof of life. Of survival. Of something that had not burned. Her back hit the side of a supply wagon. Cold wood against her spine. Heat everywhere else. Knox, she breathed. A warning, a plea, and a surrender. He paused just long enough to search her face. His eyes were dark now, the gold nearly swallowed by his pupils, but he was still present, still asking without words. Tell me to stop. She couldn't. She should have, but instead, she dragged him back down to her mouth. Weeks of restraint snapped. His too. He lifted her easily, hands beneath her thighs, and she wrapped her legs around his waist without thinking. The position pressed her center against him, and she gasped into his mouth. He carried her beyond the edge of camp, into the shadows where the mountains swallowed sound, away from fires, away from witnesses, away from everything but the cold night air and the heat between them. He lowered her onto a thick bedroll he must have grabbed without her noticing, spread hastily over packed snow. She didn't care about anything but the weight of him above her. The cold bit at her skin as her furs fell away. His mouth traced the curve of her neck, her shoulder, and then moved lower. He moved like a man who had finally allowed himself to want something he had been denying. Like restraint had been costing him, and now he was done with it. And she responded like a woman who had tried to be rational and failed spectacularly. When he lowered himself over her, it was not conquest. It was collision. His mouth found hers again as his hands worked at the fastenings of her dress. Impatient and needing, the fabric gave way, and cold air hit her skin, followed immediately by the heat of his palms. He groaned against her throat when he found her bare. You have no idea, he murmured. How many nights I have thought of this. Her hands fisted in his hair. Then stop thinking. He laughed. A low, rough sound that vibrated against her skin. Then his mouth moved lower. She arched beneath him as he traced a path down her sternum, over her ribs and across her stomach. His tongue dipped into her navel, and she gasped, her hips lifting involuntarily. He looked up at her. His eyes were almost black in the darkness, but she could feel his smile against her skin. Impatient? Always. His laugh this time was softer. Then his mouth continued its journey. When he reached the apex of her thighs, she stopped breathing. He was slow, deliberate, and torturous in his patience. His tongue traced patterns that made her see stars behind her closed eyes. Knox. His name came out broken. He hummed against her in response, and the vibration sent her over. She came with a cry that she barely remembered to muffle, her body shuddering beneath him. By the time she stopped shaking, he had moved back up her body. His eyes met hers. That, he said quietly, is what you do to me. She reached for the fastenings of his trousers. This time, he was the one who stopped breathing. Her hands were direct and kneading. When she finally wrapped her fingers around him, he groaned and dropped his forehead to her shoulder. Marina. Quiet, she whispered. We're not alone out here. He laughed again, but it turned into a gasp as her hand moved. She guided him to her entrance. Their eyes met, and the unspoken question was there again. Are you sure? She lifted her hips in answer. He sank into her with a slowness that was its own kind of torture, filling her inch by inch. When he was fully seated, he paused to let her adjust. Then he began to move. The rhythm started slow and deep. Each thrust was deliberate, as if he were trying to tell her something words couldn't convey. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper. His control fractured. The pace quickened, harder, faster. The slap of skin against skin, and their breath mingling in the cold air as the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to what was happening below. He reached between them, found the center of her pleasure and pressed. She shattered, clenching around him and crying out against his shoulder. He followed moments later, burying his face in her neck as he spilled into her, his breath ragged. For a long moment, Neither of them moved. Then he rolled to the side, pulling her with him and keeping her close against his chest. The cold crept back in, but neither of them cared. The night stretched, slow and intense. They came together twice more before dawn, once with her above him, riding him slowly while he watched her with an expression she couldn't read, and once again just before the sky began to lighten, quick and desperate and warm. Every touch was deliberate, every breath shared. When they finally stilled, tangled in warmth despite the mountain cold, his fingers traced lazy patterns along her spine. "You think you intrude," he murmured against her hair. "You have already rooted yourself into this tribe." She lay quiet, heart racing and guilt flickering at the edges. Danielle's face flashed in her mind, fire, strong and honorable. The woman who was supposed to be here, but Knox's hand slid up her back, grounding her in the present. "I do not seek familiarity," he said softly. "I seek endurance." His thumb brushed her jaw. "I seek partnership." Her breath faltered. This was not how the novel had gone. This was not the path that had been written. And yet, here they were, bound not by convenience but by something deeper. Something chosen. In the distance, the wind howled over the mountain ridge. Below them, the tribe slept, shaken but alive. Arinthia had fallen. Ashes were behind them. But here, in the cold dark, something new had begun. And it was nothing like the story she once knew. Foundations. They found the valley at the end of winter. It revealed itself slowly, like something that did not wish to be owned. For 3 days they had climbed through increasingly narrow passes, the air thinning, the trees giving way to bare rock and wind-scoured stone. The tribe moved in silence, conserving energy, trusting their scouts to find the way. Then, the mountain pass opened. The basin spread before them like a promise, carved by ancient glaciers, with steep cliffs rising on 3 sides like walls built by giants. Dense pine forests hugged the lower slopes, dark green against the gray rock. A river cut silver through the center, catching the weak sunlight and throwing it back in fragments. Snow still clung to the shaded rock faces, but the valley floor breathed early spring. Patches of green showed through the melt. The air smelled different here, softer, alive. Water. Arable land. Natural defenses. The Goran did not cheer. They assessed. Scouts spread outward in disciplined arcs, disappearing into the tree line, their movements efficient and silent. This was not a moment for celebration. It was a moment for deliberation. Danielle rode at the head of the western flank, her red hair braided tight against her skull, sword at her back and bow slung across her shoulders. She moved like she had been born for this. Not for wandering, not for exile, but for claiming. For taking empty land and making it hers. Marina stood beside Knox on a ridge overlooking the valley. The wind pulled at her cloak and at the loose strands of blonde hair that had escaped her braid. Below them, the valley spread like a map waiting to be filled. "It narrows here," she said quietly, pointing toward the mouth of the pass. The approach was tight, flanked by rising rock on both sides. If you fortify that point, no army could enter without being funneled. A handful of defenders could hold against hundreds. Knox nodded. His gaze followed her finger. "Already calculating, already planning." "And the river splits," she continued, tracing the silver line. "If you redirect part of it, you could create irrigation channels across the southern fields. The soil there looks dark, rich. It would grow well with proper water." He glanced at her. "You are already planning." She met his eyes calmly. "Yes." He did not smile, but something in his expression settled. It wasn't approval exactly, it was something deeper. Recognition. "We will build here," he declared. And so they did. The first months were brutal. Shelters before walls. Food before comfort. Security before beauty. Every day was a calculation of priorities, a weighing of needs against resources. Knox organized the labor with military precision. Teams were assigned: woodcutters, stone movers, hunters, foragers. Everyone worked, from the eldest elder to the smallest child who could carry kindling. Danielle led the outer defense patrols, mapping every inch of the surrounding terrain. She rode out at dawn and returned at dusk, her horse lathered, her eyes sharp with new knowledge. She trained warriors relentlessly, especially the women who volunteered to form a dedicated combat division. It was not symbolic, it was functional. She did not believe in ornamental strength. If a woman wanted to fight, she would fight well enough to survive. If she couldn't, she wouldn't train at all. By summer's end, she stood at the head of a disciplined unit of female warriors, archers, riders, and blade fighters, who moved as one. They were admired not because they were women who fought, but because they were exceptional. Children watched her in awe. Young girls followed her drills with wide eyes, mimicking her movements with sticks and whispered determination. The Goran did not whisper about her lineage anymore. They called her commander. Marina built differently. Where Danielle carved the outer perimeter, Marina shaped the interior. Her domain was not the wild borders, but the living heart of the settlement. The first structure she oversaw was not a hall of leadership or a storehouse for weapons. It was a healer's house, stone foundation, laid deep enough to withstand the freeze. Proper drainage channels cut into the floor so water wouldn't pool. Ventilation openings high in the walls to allow smoke and infection to escape. Designed so they could be closed against weather when needed. She trained apprentices, not based on status or lineage, but on aptitude. A girl of 12 with steady hands, a boy of 15 who remembered every herb she showed him, a widow in her 40s who absorbed new knowledge like dry soil took rain. You wash your hands before touching a wound, she repeated so often it became doctrine. Always. Even if you think they're clean. Even if you just washed them. Before every wound, every time, she introduced boiled instruments, knives heated until the water steamed, then cooled in clean water. She taught them to rotate bedding to prevent rot and infestation, and created isolation corners for fevers to contain contagion. At first, some elders muttered. Then, mortality dropped. Infections that once killed became survivable. Wounds that would have festered healed clean. Fevers that would have claimed children broke, and left them weak, but alive. Infant survival increased. The first winter after the healer's house was complete, only 2 babies were lost, compared to nearly a dozen the year before. The muttering stopped. From there came sanitation trenches dug downhill from living quarters, carrying waste away from the water supply. The work was unpleasant, and Marina worked alongside the teams, her sleeves rolled up and her hands blistered. Her presence silenced complaints through sheer example. Waste management protocols followed. Latrines were dug deep and covered. She designated areas for different types of refuse and set rules about where animals could graze. Then came the separated livestock enclosures, designed to prevent the spread of illness and keep waste from contaminating human areas. Then came trade infrastructure. Her father became indispensable. He helped organize surplus, creating systems to track what they had and what they needed. He established standardized exchange measures so that barter with passing traders would be fair. He negotiated with nearby mountain clans, his merchants calm, disarming suspicion. Marina insisted on record-keeping, written inventories of everything, food, tools, weapons, medicine. Agreements were documented in duplicate. She established a small learning hall beside the healer's building. At first it was meant to teach hygiene and basic wound care, but it evolved. Reading to understand inventories, arithmetic to calculate rations, herbal knowledge to know what could treat and what could kill. And she insisted that girls attend. Why? One elder asked. The question wasn't hostile, just practical. Girls married out. Girls bore children, because an educated girl becomes a capable woman, Marina answered simply. And capable women strengthen tribes. They raise healthier children. They notice problems before they become crises. The elder had grunted, unconvinced, but Nox supported her without hesitation. That was when the shift became undeniable. He no longer made decisions alone, not because he was weak, the tribe had seen him fight, but because he had learned the power of consultation. Evening councils became common. Danielle was present, her knowledge of the terrain absolute. Senior warriors weighed decisions against the cost in blood. Marina was present, her ledgers and layered thinking, filling the gaps no one else saw. Nox would outline the issue, a dispute over grazing land or the acceptance of refugees. Then he would look to Marina. What are we not seeing? He asked it openly, without ego. They debated intellectually, without rancor. He pushed back when he disagreed. She held her ground when she knew she was right. The tribe began to see it. This was not the passion of young lovers. It was something older. Danielle saw it most clearly. It was not fire between Nox and Marina. It was gravity. When crises emerged, drought fears or trade disputes, he did not burn toward Marina. He anchored to her. He sought her steady gaze, and her ability to see 3 seasons ahead. She became his compass, not his flame. 2 years passed. The valley changed. Stone walls rose at the mountain pass, fitted so carefully that a knife blade couldn't slip between the joints. Irrigation channels turned dry soil fertile. The first full harvest yielded enough grain to fill the storehouses twice over. Caravans began arriving cautiously, drawn by whispers of a place where the strong didn't simply take from the weak. In the original story, the Goran settlement struggled for 5 years before reaching half this strength. Now, they flourished. Danielle's command unit became legend. Her warriors were disciplined and unyielding. When a raiding party of 50 tested the pass, Danielle's unit of 20 met them. The battle lasted less than an hour. 30 raiders lay dead. The rest fled. Danielle's unit suffered 4 wounded, none killed. She did not marry. She did not soften. But she evolved. Power settled into her bones. She walked with the confidence of someone who had carved her own place. One evening, Danielle found Marina standing beside the irrigation channels. The sun was setting, staining the valley gold. Danielle came to stand beside her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, quietly, "I once thought I would stand beside him. No bitterness. Just truth." Marina watched the water. "You still do," she said gently. Danielle's jaw tightened faintly. "Not in the way I imagined. I thought fire would bind him," Danielle continued. "I thought we would burn together, and that would be enough." Marina turned slightly. "And instead, he builds with you. He listens to you in ways he does not listen to others. Even me. When he looks at you, he's not looking for warmth. He's looking for answers." Marina exhaled slowly. "I never intended to displace you." "You didn't. You altered the field." Danielle huffed a quiet laugh. "I know. I command an army. Young girls look at me and see possibility, not marriage. They see someone who picks herself." Marina smiled. "That matters." Danielle studied her. "You do not glow when he enters a room. You steady." Marina considered that. It was true. The hunger between her and Knox had not vanished. Their nights were still intense. But in daylight, it was alignment. He would touch her wrist absent-mindedly while reviewing plans, as if grounding himself. He trusted her judgment. Danielle nodded slowly. "I once thought I would stand beside him." Marina met her gaze. "Then stand beside him still. Just not in the shape you once thought." Danielle inhaled deeply, then smiled. It wasn't wistful, it was resolved. "I think I prefer this version." She was not a consort. She was a commander. As the sun dipped behind the cliffs, Knox stood at the high wall. When Marina joined him, he did not turn immediately. "You have built something remarkable," he said quietly. "We have," she corrected. He looked at her then. Grounded. "You were never an intrusion," he said. Below them, Danielle's warriors trained under torchlight, their movements precise. The kingdom they had carved stood resilient. It would endure, because fire wins battles, but water shapes worlds. That night, in the house they had built together, Marina lay tangled with Knox. His hand traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "You think too much," he murmured. She laughed softly. "Someone has to." "Danielle spoke with you today," he noted. "She's finding her place," Marina answered. "The one that fits." Knox was quiet. "She is formidable. I could not have built this without her, nor without you." Marina lifted her head. "I know." He kissed her then, slow, deep, and certain. "What we have," he said quietly, "is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Less." She smiled. "I expected nothing." He searched her face. "And now?" "Now," she said, "I expect everything." His eyes darkened with something deeper than hunger. He rolled her beneath him and kissed her again. The night stretched, slow and deliberate. Every touch was a choice renewed. Outside, the valley slept. Inside, something had been built that would outlast them both. Chapter 6. The Weight of Water. The valley had a name now. Arinthia. It was not a declaration of conquest or a cold claim of ownership. It was a marker, a simple statement that this was where the Goran had finally found a home. The name had emerged organically, spoken first by a child too young to remember the original Arinthia, then repeated by elders who found the word fit their tongues. 5 years had passed since the first scouts had ridden through the narrow pass. 5 years of building, bleeding, burying, and birthing. The settlement had become a true stronghold. Stone walls crowned the pass, manned day and night by Danielle's warriors, both men and women now, though her original female unit remained the most feared in the region. Guard towers dotted the ridges, their watchfires visible for miles through the thin mountain air. Even the river had been tamed. Its silver waters were now channeled through the valley in a careful geometric grid that watered every field with equitable precision. Trade caravans arrived with regularity. They came not just from the nearby mountain clans but from farther south, survivors of the Arinthian collapse, merchants who had fled the ensuing chaos, and even a few northern lords seeking a stable alliance. The valley's reputation had spread like a warming fire, fair dealing, ironclad defenses, and a healer whose skills bordered on the miraculous. Marina stood at the window of the healer's house, watching the morning light spill across the valley floor. 5 years. In her first life, 5 years had meant very little, a blink of an eye, a breath of air, a job she merely tolerated, and a cat who returned the sentiment. She had drifted through time like flotsam on a current, going wherever life's tide pushed her. But here, every single day had weight. Every choice mattered. Every life she touched left indelible marks upon her hands. Thinking again, she turned. Knox stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the heavy frame. He was older now, Not in the way of decay, but in the way of deepening. There were more lines etched at the corners of his eyes, and a dusting of gray at his temples. There was also more weight in his gaze when it settled upon her. 5 years together had changed them both. Always, she said. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled her against the dark fur of his cloak, and kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of their early days, nor the hungry, frantic claiming of nights stolen in the bitter cold. This was slower, deeper, the kiss of a man who had woken next to the same woman for years and still wanted her with a steady, quiet certainty. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "The council meets in an hour," he murmured. "I know. You'll be late." "I'm never late." He huffed a quiet laugh. It was true. She was never late. The healer's house ran on schedules she had designed, apprentices she had meticulously trained, and protocols she had written in her own hand. It ran without her now, most days. That was the point. You must build something that can outlast you. "Walk with me," she said. They walked through the valley as the sun rose higher. They passed the fields where early workers already bent to their labor, the livestock enclosures where children helped with the morning feeding, and the training grounds where Danielle's warriors ran their drills. Their movements were precise and powerful. Danielle herself stood at the center of the dust, calling out corrections. Her red hair was streaked with gray now, but her spine remained as straight as a blade. When she saw them approaching, she lifted one hand in a curt acknowledgement. Marina raised her own in return. They were not friends in the traditional sense of easy intimacy and whispered secrets, but they were something perhaps more durable, a blend of respect and understanding. It was the knowledge that they had both found their places, different places, but true ones nonetheless. "You should join the council today," Knox said as they walked on. "I always join the council, not as a healer, as an architect." Marina glanced at him, and he continued. "The mountain clans want to formalize the trade alliance. They're asking for terms. I want you at the table." She considered this. In the early years, she had attended councils as a consultant, someone who knew the logistics of supplies, sanitation, and survival. Her voice had been heard, but it had been one voice among many. Now, he was asking her to sit as an equal, not because she was his partner, but because she had earned the seat. "I'll be there," she said. The council met in the Great Hall, a longhouse built of stone and timber, large enough to hold the entire valley for a celebration, but today occupied only by the dozen people who guided the settlement's fate. Danielle sat at Knox's right hand, as she always did. Her position was formal now, commander of defense, with authority over all military matters. It was a title voted upon by the warriors themselves, not one granted as a favor by Knox. Marina's father sat among the trade representatives, his ledgers open before him. He had aged gracefully, his hair now a shock of white, his hands still steady as he moved his pen. He caught Marina's eye as she entered, and offered a small, proud smile. Her mother had died 2 years ago. It had been quiet, in her sleep, and without pain. Marina had held her hand at the very end, whispering words that weren't quite goodbyes, watching her face relax into a final peace. The grief had been real, but so had the gratitude. She had given her mother 5 more years. 5 years of watching her son grow into a man, and her daughter become a pillar of a new world. It was enough. The mountain clan representatives were rough men, bearded and wary. They had come to formalize trade, metal for wool, timber for finished goods, but they also came to test the strength of the valley. "Your valley prospers," the eldest said, his voice gravelly. "More than any settlement, this deep in the peaks should." Knox inclined his head. "We work hard. And you defend well." The man's gaze flicked to Danielle. "We've heard of your warriors. Even in our halls they speak of the red-haired commander." Danielle said nothing. Her silence was more formidable than any boast. The negotiations stretched through the morning. Marina spoke when relevant, about supply capacities, sustainable harvest rates, and the timelines for medicinal exports. The mountain men listened. They did not dismiss her as they might have 5 years ago. When the agreement was finally signed, the eldest mountain man paused at the door. "Your valley is different," he said. "We've traded with many, but you've built something that shouldn't exist this far from civilization." Knox glanced at Marina. "We had help." The man followed his gaze to her. "Ah, that explains much." After he left, Marina turned to Knox. "What exactly does that explain?" He smiled, not the sharp smile of a warrior, but something softer. That the strongest walls aren't always built of stone. Later that night, Marina sat alone on the ridge, overlooking the valley. The lights below flickered like earthbound stars. Knox found her there, as he always did. He sat beside her, his shoulder against hers. "I used to dream of this," he said finally. "Of sitting still, of building something that didn't need constant defense." She leaned into him. "And now I dream of you, of the way you frown at ledgers like they've personally offended you." She laughed. I don't frown. You absolutely frown. They sat in a comfortable silence. The years had stripped away the frantic urgency of their beginning. What remained was the steady weight of a chosen partnership. Nox, are you happy? He turned to look at her. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and steady. I have you. I have a people who are no longer exiles. I have a valley that will outlast my name. I am more than happy. I am content. I never expected this, she admitted. When I woke in that longhouse, I thought I would die. I thought the story would kill me. The story? Marina hesitated. She had never told him the truth of who she was, of the world she had left behind. But tonight felt like a threshold. In the story, she said slowly, Marina Vale dies. She dies when Arinthia falls, screaming and alone, so you can learn how to grieve. She exists only to prepare you for Danielle. Nox went very still. Danielle, he repeated. In the story, she's the heroine, the one who matches your fire with her own. He was quiet for a long moment. And you? I'm not from here. I was someone else, in another world. I died in an accident, and woke in her body. In a story I had read for entertainment. She waited for him to pull away, to demand an explanation she couldn't give. Instead, he pulled her closer. You are the most real person I know, he said quietly. I do not care where you came from. I care that you are here. I see a woman who saved children, who built systems to keep us alive. I see the woman I love. The word landed like a stone in still water. Love. He had never said it before, neither had she. It had seemed too large, but it wasn't fragile anymore. It was bedrock. I love you, she whispered. They made love on the ridge, under the stars, with the valley spread below them like an offering. It was deliberate and tender. Every touch was a declaration. Every movement was an affirmation of years shared and years still to come. He undressed her with hands that had mapped her body across countless nights, and she returned the favor, tracing the scars she had once treated. When he entered her, it was a homecoming, not a conquest, but a return. They moved together in a rhythm older than thought, older than the story that had tried to write them into different roles. What happens now? She asked afterward, tangled together under the furs. We live, he whispered. We build. We watch the valley grow. And Danielle? Danielle builds her own legacy. She doesn't need mine. It was true. Danielle had become something the original story never imagined, a leader in her own right. She deserved that. They married at the summer solstice. The whole valley gathered. Danielle stood as witness, her gray eyes bright. Marina's father walked her to the ceremony, his hand steady. Nox waited at the center, wearing furs and a smile she had never seen before, open and whole. They spoke words older than the tribe. They exchanged tokens, a knife from him, a healing salve from her, symbols of the partnership they brought to the world. They kissed as the sun reached its highest point, and the valley cheered until the mountains echoed. That night, Marina lay in Nox's arms and thought about endings. This was not how the story went. In the original, the Goran struggled, and Nox grew old with only memories. But here, they had chosen each other. What are you thinking? Nox asked. She smiled. That I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Outside, the valley slept. Inside, two people held each other in the dark. And somewhere, in another world, another Marina might have died. But here, she lived. She loved. She built something that would endure. Fire wins battles. But water shapes worlds. And Marina had become the tide. The end. If you enjoyed this journey through Arinthia, please like, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe for more stories where we rewrite destiny.